The sky above Oryx Delta did not provide the comfort of blue or the mystery of black. It was a suffocating, bruised shade of violet, choked by the static discharge of orbital cannons. Empress Xylara stood amidst the ruins of her personal command crawler, her 4 arms trembling, a sensation she had not felt in 3 centuries of absolute rule. Beneath her feet, the sands of the delta were no longer silicon. They had been flash-frozen into jagged shards of obsidian glass by the sheer heat of the Vorzul plasma bombardment. Her elite vanguard, the Obsidian Guard, were silent. They had been the finest warriors in the Kalan hegemony, soldiers who had conquered 10 star systems in her name. Now, they were mere silhouettes of ash, frozen in the postures of a final, futile defense. 300 lives extinguished in less than 9 minutes. Xylara stared at her gauntlet, watching the bioluminescent veins in her skin flicker and fade. Her internal systems were diverting power to her core organs, abandoning her limbs to the creeping cold of shock. "I have ruled for 412 years, she thought, the words a hollow echo in the vast, empty theater of her mind. "I have shattered moons and rewritten the laws of physics to suit my whims. And yet, I am dying in the dirt of a backwater border world." A sharp, grinding pain flared in her lower right ribs. She tried to shift her weight, but her secondary left arm hung uselessly, the bone splintered by a concussion wave. The Vorzul swarm had planned this with a surgical precision that bordered on the prophetic. They had invited her to Oryx Delta under the guise of a resource treaty, knowing that her pride would demand she attend in person. They didn't just want her territory. They wanted the myth of her invincibility to bleed out in the dust. The atmospheric jamming was absolute. Her neural link to the hegemony fleet was a jagged mess of white noise. She was alone. For the first time since her coronation, Xylara felt the true weight of the crown. It was a leaden shroud, dragging her toward the glass shards. Then she heard it. A sound that did not belong to the high-pitched hum of Vorzul gravity drives or the rhythmic clicking of their insectoid infantry. It was a heavy, rhythmic thud, the sound of boots hitting the ground with deliberate, weary intent. Xylara forced her primary right hand to grip the hilt of her kinetic blade. Her vision was blurring, the amber rings of her eyes narrowing as she tried to focus on the silhouette emerging through the haze of smoke and static. It was small, bipedal, wearing armor that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrapyard and held together by sheer stubbornness. A human. She knew of them, of course. The Terran expeditionary forces were a nuisance on the galactic rim, a species that had only recently discovered how to fold space without collapsing their own lungs. They were scavengers, survivors, and, by Kalan standards, utterly insignificant. The man stopped 5 meters away. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't kneel. He didn't even look impressed by the fact that he was standing in the presence of a god queen who could, in better health, vaporize him with a thought. He simply adjusted a heavy pack on his shoulder and wiped a smear of blue Kalan blood from his visor. "Looks like you've had a hell of a day, Your Majesty," the human said. His voice was gravelly, transmitted through a low-fidelity comms unit that crackled with every syllable. Xylara felt a surge of ancient reflexive pride. "You dare address me without the ritual of intent? Leave this place, scavenger. The Vorzul will be here to claim their trophy soon. I will not have my death witnessed by a lesser being." The human snorted. It was a dry, irreverent sound. He began walking toward her, his boots crunching on the obsidian glass. "First of all, the name's Jax. Staff Sergeant Jax Thorne. Second, if I leave, you're just a very expensive corpse. And third, The Vorzul are currently busy dealing with a localized seismic charge I left on their primary scouting path. We have maybe 15 minutes before they figure out I'm just one guy with a bad attitude. He reached her side and knelt. Xylara tried to strike him, but her muscles seized. She slumped against the wreckage of her crawler, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Jax didn't flinch. He reached into his kit and pulled out a device that hummed with a low, green light, a Terran medical scanner. "Don't touch me," she hissed, though the threat was toothless. "Relax, Princess," Jax said, his hands moving with a practiced, clinical speed that caught her off guard. "I've patched up worse than you in the scrapyard wars. You've got a compound fracture in arm, 3, 4 cracked ribs, and your internal cooling system is leaking coolant like a punctured radiator. If I don't stabilize you, you're going to go into thermal arrest in 10 minutes. "Why?" she whispered, her amber eyes searching his face. "Why stay? I am your superior in every metric. My empire has looked upon your kind with nothing but disdain. You owe me nothing but a quick grave." Jax paused, his hand hovering over a synth-derm weaver. He looked her directly in the eye, something no Kalan citizen had done in a century. There was no fear in his gaze. There was only a weary, ironclad sense of duty. "Because nobody should have to die alone in the dark," he said simply. "Even a queen." He pressed the weaver against her side. The contact was a shock to her system, a sudden intrusion of warmth. But then, something happened that defied every law of Kalan biology. The Empress's body, sensing its imminent termination, reached out for a tether. In its desperation to survive, her neural architecture bypassed her conscious will. A golden spark ignited at the base of her skull. It surged downward, crossing the physical gap between her skin and his hands. Xylara tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by a sudden, deafening roar of consciousness. The cortex bridge had opened. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't a choice. It was a biological scream for help. And Jax Thorne, the man who had decided to stay, was caught in the center of the blast. Jax felt the world tilt. One moment he was focused on the technical specifications of a Kalan ribcage, trying to remember if the blue fluid was blood or lymphatic waste, and the next, his brain felt like it had been plugged into a supernova. It wasn't just pain. It was a tidal wave of 400 years of memory. He saw the birth of stars, the crushing silence of the High Council, the taste of air on a dozen different worlds, and the crushing, suffocating loneliness of a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be touched without someone first asking for permission. "Get out!" he heard a voice scream, but it wasn't in his ears. It was inside his frontal lobe. He fell back, his head hitting the glass sand with a sickening thud. His vision fractured. He saw Xylara, but she was different now. Through the link, he could see the bioluminescent map of her nervous system, glowing with a frantic, pulsing gold. He could feel her fear, not the sharp, frantic fear of a soldier, but the deep, existential terror of a monument realizing it was made of salt. "Jax!" a voice crackled over his helmet comms. It was Rena, his squad's combat medic, who was holding a position 3 kilometers to the west. "Jax, your vitals are spiking! What the hell is going on over there? Are you KIA? Speak to me!" Jax gasped for air, his lungs feeling like they were filled with liquid lead. He rolled onto his side, his hands clawing at the sand. I'm green, Rena," he managed to choke out. "Just a bit of feedback. Stay on the extract. Don't move until I give the word." "Feedback? You sound like you're sucking vacuum. Get out of there, Sarge. The Vorzul just dropped a heavy-lift dropship on your coordinates. You're about to be foobar." Jax ignored her. He looked up. Xylara was staring at him, her forearms clutching her chest, her eyes wide with a horror that surpassed her physical injuries. "What? What have you done, human?" she whispered. "I didn't do anything," Jack snapped, pushing himself up. The world was still spinning, and he could feel her headache, a throbbing, rhythmic pressure behind his left eye. "You're the one who started glowing like a neon sign. What was that?" "The resonance," she breathed, her voice trembling. "It is an ancient survival reflex. In the face of certain death, a Kaelin may bond their essence to a committed ally. It is supposed to be a sacred rite, performed over months of meditation. My body. It recognized your intent. It chose you." Jax wiped the sweat from his brow. "Great. Fantastic. So we're married now? Or am I just your new psychic battery?" "We are linked," Xylara said, her dignity returning in small, icy increments. "I can feel your pulse. I can feel your memories of a cold, gray city by a river. I can feel the weight of the men you lost. It is disorganized, filthy." "Yeah, well, welcome to the human brain, Your Highness," Jax grunted. He stood up, his legs shaking, and checked his pulse rifle. "It's a mess in here, and we don't have time for a tour. We've got a Vorzul dropship coming in hot, and my seismic distraction just went dark. That means the tin heads are coming for us." He reached down and offered her a hand. Xylara stared at it for a long moment. To take his hand was to acknowledge the bond. To refuse it was to die in the glass. Slowly, with a grace that even agony could not fully strip away, she placed her primary right hand in his. The spark flamed up again, warmer this time. Through the link, Jax felt a sudden surge of tactical clarity. He didn't just see the terrain, he understood its geometry. He knew where the shadows were deepest. He knew exactly how many Vorzul were in the approaching dropship. 12, all armed with thermal lances. "You can see them," he whispered. "I can see what you see," Xylara replied, her voice steadying as she drew strength from his stubborn vitality. "And I can see the gaps in their formation. Their commander is arrogant. He is leading with his heavy infantry, leaving his flanks exposed to the glass shards." Jax grinned, a sharp, dangerous expression that made Xylara's heart, and his own, skip a beat. "All right then, let's show these bugs how we do things in the dirt. You provide the math, I'll provide the muscle. We're bugging out, but we're doing it with style." He hauled her up. She was nearly 7 feet tall, a towering presence of violet skin and obsidian armor, but she leaned on him with a necessity that felt like iron. "Thorn," she said, as they began to move toward the jagged cliffs of the delta. "Yeah? If we survive this, I am going to have to kill you for seeing me like this." Jax chuckled, the sound echoing in both their minds. "Get in line, princess. Plenty of people want me dead. But for the next 10 kilometers, I'm the best friend you've got. Now, move." They disappeared into the smoke just as the first Vorzul plasma bolts began to rain down, turning the glass sand back into fire. 2 souls, separated by 100 light-years of culture and 3 centuries of ego, now beat with a single, terrified, and defiant heart. The sound of the obsidian glass grinding under Jax Thorne's boots was a rhythmic torture that vibrated directly into Empress Xylara's fractured ribs. Through the cortex bridge, the sensation was amplified. Every time his heel struck the jagged surface, she felt a dull thud in the base of her skull. It was an invasive, messy intimacy. She could feel the salt of his sweat, the friction of his industrial-grade thermal suit against his skin, and the low, constant hum of his adrenaline. It was disgusting. It was vital. "Keep moving, princess," Jax's voice echoed in her mind. though his lips did not move. His thoughts were a jagged landscape of tactical overlays and grim determination. 2 kilometers to the canyon mouth. If we don't make it before the gale hits, we're going to get shredded by flying razors. Xylara leaned her weight against his shoulder, her primary right arm hooked over his neck. Her height made the geometry of their movement awkward, like a wounded crane tethered to a stubborn badger. She hated the necessity of it. For 400 years, she had been the sun around which the Kalan hegemony drifted. Now, she was a flickering ember, kept alive by the heat of a creature who probably didn't know how to read a star chart. "I am not a princess," she projected back, her mental voice a sharp blade of violet light. "I am the sovereign of the obsidian throne. If you refer to me by that diminutive again, I shall ensure your neural receptors are the first thing I purge once my strength returns." Jax let out a short, dry laugh that she felt as a ripple in his chest cavity. "Copy that, Your Majesty. But right now, you're a sovereign who can't walk 5 meters without my help. So, how about we focus on the sitrep and save the executions for later? Stay frosty. We've got glint heads on the ridge." Xylara narrowed her amber eyes. She saw what he saw. On the ridge of the black glass dunes 300 meters to the north, a trio of Vorzul scouts moved with terrifying, insectoid fluidness. They were sleek, metallic nightmares, their carapaces reflecting the bruised sky. They didn't use light to see, they used vibration. They are sensing our footfalls, Xylara thought, her strategic mind overriding her physical agony. The obsidian glass acts as a natural conductor for kinetic energy. Every step you take is a beacon for them. Then we stopped taking steps, Jax thought back. He suddenly veered toward a massive slab of fallen crawler plating. With a grunt of effort that Xylara felt as a strain in her own lower back, he shoved her into the narrow gap beneath the metal. He scrambled in after her, pulling a camouflage tarp over the entrance. The tarp was impregnated with lead and carbon fibers designed to mask thermal signatures, but against Vorzul vibration sensors, it was little more than a prayer. "Don't breathe," Jax's thought was a cold command. Xylara bristled. "You do not command me, human. I'm the one with the gun and the working legs," he retorted. "Now shut it." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the frantic drumming of their 2 hearts. Through the bond, the 2 pulses began to synchronize, falling into a strange, haunting rhythm. 100 beats per minute. 95. 90. Xylara felt something shift in the back of Jax's mind. A shadow was moving there, a memory that wasn't hers. She saw a city of gray stone, rain-slicked streets, and the sound of screaming. Not Kalan screaming, high-pitched and melodic, but the raw, guttural roars of humans. She saw a younger Jax, his face covered in soot, kneeling over a body that had been torn in half by a plasma bolt. The scrapyard wars, she realized. The memory was thick with the scent of ozone and burnt hair. She felt his grief, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of his stomach. It was a wound that had never closed, held together only by the scar tissue of military discipline. For a moment, she forgot her own pain. She saw the human not as a scavenger, but as a vessel of immense, quiet suffering. He carried his ghosts the way she carried her crown, with a stubborn, exhausting pride. "Why do you remember this now?" she asked, her mental voice softening without her permission. "Because that's what happens when you're waiting to die," Jax thought, and there was a sudden, jarring honesty in it that made her flinch. You look back at the people you couldn't save, and you wonder if you're finally about to join them. It's the weight we carry, Xylara. You carry an empire. I carry a squad of dead men. Different scale, same gravity. A sharp, metallic scraping sound came from directly above them. A Vor-Zul scout was standing on the crawler plating. Xylara could see the tip of its serrated leg poking through a gap in the metal, inches from Jax's visor. The creature was chirping, a series of high-frequency clicks that translated in her mind as a query for prey. She felt Jax's finger tighten on the trigger of his pulse rifle. His fear was there, a sharp, electric tang. But it was wrapped in something else. Courage. Not the absence of fear, but the decision that the fear didn't get to make the calls. It was a revelation. In the Kaelin hegemony, courage was seen as a biological byproduct of superiority. You were brave because you were stronger. But this human, he was pathetically weak compared to the Vor-Zul. He was outgunned, outmatched, and physically broken. And yet, he was ready to spring. If it moves the tarp, I go high. You go low with that kinetic blade of yours, Jax thought. We take it down before it can signal the dropship. On 3. Xylara felt the ancient warrior blood of her ancestors stir. Her primary right hand gripped the hilt of her blade. The bioluminescence in her skin began to pulse with a predatory silver light. 1, Jax counted. 2. The Vor-Zul scout paused, its head tilted, sensing something else. A low, ominous rumble began to shake the ground. It wasn't the sound of engines, it was the atmosphere itself. The static gale had arrived. The scout let out a panicked screech and leaped off the plating, its multi-jointed legs carrying it toward the ridge at blurring speed. Above them, the violet sky turned a terrifying, opaque black. The sound that followed was like 1,000 glass factories shattering at once. We're staying put, Jax thought, his relief washing through the bond like cool water. If we step out there now, we're confetti. The wind hit the crawler plating with the force of a battering ram. Shards of obsidian glass, some as large as dinner plates, slammed into their makeshift shelter. The screech of metal on glass was deafening. Xylara felt the vibration in her teeth, her bones, her very soul. She felt Jax move closer in the cramped darkness. He didn't do it out of desire, but out of a raw, human instinct to protect. He shifted his body so that his armored back was toward the opening of the gap, shielding her from the shards that managed to whistle through the edges of the tarp. "Why?" she asked again, the question echoing in the shared space of their minds. "You could have used me as a shield. My scales are harder than your armor." Jax didn't answer for a long time. He just watched the black dust swirl outside. "Because that's not how the math works, Your Majesty. You're the one who knows how to stop the silenced echo. I'm just the guy who gets you to the door. You're the asset. I'm the overhead." "The overhead," she repeated. "You speak of yourself as if you are a piece of equipment." "I'm a soldier," Jax thought, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of a smile in his mind. "We're all just gear until the mission is over. Now get some shut-eye. The gale is going to blow for at least 4 hours. We move the second it drops." Xylara wanted to argue. She wanted to remind him that she was the Empress of Kaelin and did not take orders from sergeants. But the warmth of his presence was a powerful sedative. For the first time in 400 years, the crushing silence of her life had been replaced by the steady, dependable hum of another heart. She closed her amber eyes. In the darkness of the bridge, she saw the gray city again. She saw the rain. And she realized that for all her power, she had never known anything as beautiful as the simple, stupid loyalty of a man who refused to let her die alone. The static gale subsided as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Oryx Delta transformed. The dunes of obsidian had shifted into new, razor-sharp architectures, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and powdered silica. Jack's Thorn pushed the crawler plating aside with a groan that sounded like a tectonic shift. His armor was scored with deep white gouges where the glass shards had tried to eat their way through to his skin. "Rise and shine, princess," he thought, his mental voice slightly frayed at the edges. "LZ is clear for now, but the glint heads will be back to check the skellies. We need to move while the air is still ionizing." Xylara emerged from the darkness, her violet skin pale under the dim light of the twin moons. Her secondary left arm was still useless, but the synth derm Jax had applied had numbed the worst of the grinding pain. She looked at him, her 4 iris rings shifting with a complex intensity. "You survived the night," she said aloud. Her voice was a low, melodic chime that seemed out of place in the brutal landscape. "Barely," Jax replied, checking the power cell on his pulse rifle. "We've got about 8 clicks to the old Kalen listening post I spotted on the high-altitude scans. It's built into the side of the obsidian peak. If we can get inside, we can drop the jamming and send a signal to my squad." "The obsidian peak," Xylara mused. "That was the site of the first contact between my people and the Vorzul. It is a place of ghosts, human." "Perfect," Jax grunted. "I'm already carrying enough of them. 1 or 2 more won't make a difference." As they began the arduous trek, the terrain became more vertical. Jax had to use his climbing line to haul Xylara up 3 separate glass embankments. Each time, the physical contact reignited the cortex bridge with a searing intensity. The bond was no longer just a shared sensory feed. It was becoming a shared identity. Jax found himself instinctively reaching for a 3rd and 4th arm that wasn't there, while Xylara felt the phantom weight of a human rucksack on her shoulders. "It's getting deeper, isn't it?" Jax asked, as they paused near a thermal vent to catch their breath. "The link. It's like I'm starting to forget where I end and you begin." "The resonance is a predatory process," Xylara explained, her eyes fixed on the distant, jagged silhouette of the peak. "It seeks to create a single, unified survival entity. In Kalen history, the few who experienced an involuntary bond often went mad. Their egos could not withstand the pressure of another's reality. Well, I was already a little crazy before I met you, so maybe I've got a head start," Jax joked, but his thoughts were troubled. He saw a flash of a memory, a Kalen ritual where 2 warriors stood in a circle of fire, their minds fusing until they spoke with one voice. "You fear losing yourself," Xylara observed. "I've spent 32 years building this version of Jax Thorn," he thought back. "He's a bit of a bastard, and he's tired as hell, but he's mine. I don't want to wake up one morning and find out I've been overwritten by an empress." "You will not be overwritten," she promised, and for the first time there was a genuine warmth in her projection. "You will be expanded. You see the world in 3 dimensions, Jax. I see it in 11. You see time as a line. I see it as a tapestry. Do not fear the expansion. I'll try to remember that when I'm having a midlife crisis about my 4 extra arms," he retorted. They reached the base of the obsidian peak as the sun began to rise, casting long, bloody shadows across the delta. The listening post was a brutalist structure of black stone, half buried under a landslide of glass. The doors were sealed with Kalen bio locks, ancient and corroded. Xylara stepped forward, her bioluminescent markings glowing with a specific, rhythmic sequence. The stone groaned, and with a hiss of pressurized air, the heavy doors slid open. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of ancient dust and stagnant energy. This was a place of the silenced echo. The walls were lined with data crystals that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. "Wait," Jax thought. his internal alarm bells screaming. Something's wrong. The wire is hot. He shoved Xylara behind a stone pillar just as a beam of concentrated emerald light sliced through the air where she had been standing. The beam hit the opposite wall, vaporizing the stone instantly. From the shadows of the vaulted ceiling, a Vorzul stalker descended. It was larger than the scouts, its body encased in a shifting, liquid metal armor that mimicked the textures of the room. It had 6 eyes that burned with a cold, artificial intelligence. "The silenced echo," Xylara whispered. "It has already infected this place. It isn't just a signal, Jax. It's a consciousness." The stalkers screeched, a sound that bypassed their ears and went straight into the bond, a jagged spike of white noise that made Jax's nose bleed. It moved with a speed that defied physics, leaping from wall to wall. "It's too fast," Jax thought, his pulse rifle tracking the blur of motion. "I can't get a lock." "Focus on the bridge," Xylara commanded. "Do not look with your eyes. Look with mine." Jax took a breath, forcing his panic into a small, tight box. He closed his eyes. He stopped trying to track the physical body of the creature and started sensing the ripples it made in the resonance. The stalker was a void in the bridge, a cold spot of non-existence that moved through the warmth of their shared space. He felt it coming from the left. Not because he heard it, but because Xylara's peripheral awareness felt a sudden chill. "Now!" she screamed in his mind. Jax didn't aim. He let his body be guided by her intent. He spun and fired a burst of high-frequency pulses into what looked like empty air. The bolts hit the stalker mid-leap, disrupting its cloaking field and sending it crashing into a bank of data crystals. The creature tried to right itself, but Xylara was already moving. Despite her injuries, she flowed across the floor like a river of violet silk. She didn't use her kinetic blade. She reached out with her primary right hand and touched the stalker's forehead. A surge of silver light erupted from her skin. "Return to the void," she commanded. The stalker stiffened. Its liquid armor began to boil and flake away. For a second, Jax felt a scream through the bond. Not a physical scream, but a digital agony. A billion lines of code being erased in a single heartbeat. Then, the creature collapsed into a heap of inert gray slag. Xylara slumped against the wall, her breathing heavy and ragged. The effort had drained her. Her bioluminescence was nearly dark. "What was that?" Jax asked, walking over to her, his rifle still smoking. "That wasn't a standard Kalen attack. It was an exorcism," she said softly. "The silenced echo is made of the fragmented minds of those it has absorbed. I simply gave that fragment back its silence." She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with a deep, haunting sadness. "It was one of mine, Jax. That stalker. It was running on the tactical subroutines of General Vaughn. He was my mentor. He was lost in the Vorzul invasion of the Rim 3 years ago." Jax sat down on the floor beside her, his back against the cold stone. He didn't know what to say. In the human military, when you lost someone, they were gone. You buried them, you drank to them, and you tried to forget. But for Xylara, her dead were being recycled into monsters, forced to hunt her across the stars. "That's cold," he said finally, "even for the bugs." "It is the nature of the echo," she said. "It does not kill. It incorporates. It believes it is saving us from the chaos of individuality. It thinks it is creating a perfect, silent unity." "Well, I've always liked a bit of noise," Jax thought, and he felt a small, bitter smile from her in return. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, dented metal flask. He unscrewed the cap and took a sip before handing it to her. It was lukewarm water, flavored with a cheap, synthetic caffeine tab. "Try some of this," he said aloud. It's not Kalen nectar, but it'll keep your heart ticking. Xylara took a sip and immediately coughed, her face twisting in a grimace of pure disgust. This is an abomination, human. It tastes like the runoff from an engine core. Yeah, that's the good stuff, Jax grinned. As they sat in the dim light of the ancient post, the resonance settled into a quiet, melancholy hum. Xylara looked at the flask in her hand, then at the scarred, weary man beside her. You knew you couldn't beat that stalker alone, she said. Nope, Jax admitted. Not a chance. I'm a grunt, Xylara. I know my limits. And yet you didn't run. Running is a lot of work, he thought, and he projected a memory of his father, an old man with calloused hands, telling him that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he could do, but by what he refused to let happen. I couldn't let it take you. Not after we've come this far. Xylara leaned her head back against the pillar. I have spent 4 centuries being worshipped, feared, and obeyed. But I do not think anyone has ever simply refused to let me be taken. Choice, Jax thought. That's the only thing that matters in the end. The bugs don't have it. The echo doesn't have it. But we do. We choose to stay, even when it's stupid, even when it hurts. Xylara reached out with her lower right hand, the one that wasn't broken, and briefly touched his arm. It wasn't a formal gesture. It was a human one. Then let us be stupid together. Staff Sergeant Jax Thorne. We have a signal to send. Jax nodded, pushing himself to his feet. Copy that. Let's find the comms array and see if we can't kick this echo right in the teeth. As they walked deeper into the listening post, the bond was no longer a weight. It was a weapon. They moved with a synchronized grace that made the shadows flee. The first layer of the truth had been peeled away. The enemy wasn't just a swarm. It was a mirror. And the only way to break a mirror was to be something it couldn't reflect. They were two, and they were one. And for the first time in their lives, neither of them was alone in the dark. Jax found the primary terminal at the center of the structure. It was a massive slab of obsidian, pulsing with a rhythmic violet light that matched Xylara's natural glow. He began to work, his fingers dancing across the interface with a surprisingly nimble touch. How do you know how to operate Kalen tech? Xylara asked, watching him over his shoulder. I told you, I'm a gearhead, he muttered. I spent 3 months on a captured Kalen frigate after the Battle of Sector 7. I had to learn how to fix the life support or suffocate. You'd be surprised how fast you can learn a foreign language when the air starts tasting like pennies. He bypassed a dozen security firewalls, his mind humming with a strange, hybrid logic. He was using human brute force algorithms combined with Xylara's intuitive understanding of Kalen harmonics. It was a beautiful, chaotic dance of data. There, he thought, the jamming is down. A sudden blast of noise erupted from his helmet speakers. Static, voices, data bursts. The electromagnetic spectrum of Oryx Delta had been reopened. "Rena!" Jax shouted into his comms. "Rena, do you copy? This is Thorne. We're at the Obsidian Peak listening post. Do you copy?" Static. Then, a voice, faint and distorted. "Jax, is that you? We thought you were a ghost, Sarge. We've got 2 dropships. Inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Stay. Frosty." 12 minutes, Jax thought, his heart racing. That's too long. The Vorzul will be here in 5. Xylara looked at the terminal. She saw a secondary data stream hidden beneath the comms traffic. It was a signal from the deep space beyond the system. It was the echo, and it was answering her. "It knows we are here," she said, her voice cold. "And it is bringing everything it has to silence us." Jax looked at her, then at the terminal. He knew what he had to do. He had to hold the post. He had to be the overhead one last time. "Get behind the terminal," he commanded, his voice tight. "I'm going to set up a perimeter with the remaining charges." Xylara didn't move. She looked at him through the bond, seeing the decision he had already made. He was going to stay at the door. He was going to be the shield again. No, she thought. Jax froze. The command was so powerful it stopped his muscles from twitching. "We do not do this as a shield and an asset," she projected, her mind a blazing sun of violet light. "We do this as one. You are not my overhead, Jax Thorne. You are my partner." She stepped toward him, her markings glowing with an intensity that illuminated the entire room. She reached out and touched his helmet, her fingers lingering on the scarred metal. "The resonance is not just about survival," she whispered. "It is about harmony. If we are to stop the echo, we must show it a frequency it cannot incorporate. A frequency of two wills, choosing to be one." Jax took a slow, deep breath. He felt her fear, her pride, her ancient loneliness, and he felt his own grief, his stubbornness, his quiet hope. He let them mix. He let the boundaries dissolve. "All right," he thought. "Let's make some noise." Outside, the first Vorzul dropships began to descend like silver vultures. But inside the obsidian peak, a new light was burning. A light that had no name in the Kalan language, and no entry in the human military manuals. The light of two people who had found a reason to stay. The 12 minutes would feel like an eternity, but as they stood together in the heart of the ghosts, they weren't afraid. They were ready. Because the universe finds its own arrangements, and today it had arranged for a queen and a soldier to rewrite the stars. The transition from the scorched obsidian sands of Oryx Delta to the sterile, pressurized interior of the Kalan dreadnought, the Eternal Vigil, was a violent assault on Jax Thorne's senses. One moment, he was breathing in the grit of a dying world and the metallic tang of ionizing air. The next, he was surrounded by the scent of synthetic lavender and the humming vibration of 1,000 anti-gravity generators. The extraction had been a chaotic blur of violet armor and barking commands. The Kalan rescue team, a specialized unit known as the Sun Eaters, had descended like vengeful gods, their sleek, four-armed forms moving with a precision that made Jax feel like he was watching a ballet choreographed by a butcher. They hadn't been gentle. To the Sun Eaters, Jax was a biological anomaly, a parasite clinging to the radiant sun of their Empress. They had separated him from Xylara the moment the airlock cycled, 4 soldiers pinning him against the cold, dark stone walls of the corridor, while a medic scanned him with a device that felt like it was trying to peel the skin off his forehead. "Easy there, you oversized clankers," Jax had growled, his voice a dry rasp. "I'm the one who kept her heart beating. Maybe show a little gratitude before you start poking around under the hood." The soldiers hadn't responded. They didn't speak to humans. They didn't even look at him. To them, he was just a meat sack that had somehow stumbled into a sacred mystery. Through the Cortex bridge, Jax felt Xylara's fury. It was a cold, sharp spike that pierced through the sedative the medics had injected into her. She was 3 levels above him in a high-security medical bay, surrounded by the best healers in the hegemony, but her mind was still anchored to his. "Let him go," she commanded, not with her voice, but through the resonance. Her mental projection was so powerful that the soldiers pinning Jax actually flinched, their eyes widening in shock as they felt the Empress's authority vibrating in their own neural nets. "We cannot, Empress," a voice replied over the ship's internal comms, a voice that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. "High Arbiter Malachor has ordered the human to be quarantined. He is a Class 1 biological and psychic contaminant. Malachor, Xylara's thought hissed in Jax's mind. The old fossil. He's been waiting for a reason to undermine me for a century. Jax, stay sharp. Don't let them rattle your cage. They're going to try to paint this as a hostile takeover of my mind. Great, Jax thought back, his head throbbing from the psychic feedback. So I've gone from being a savior to a virus in under 10 minutes. That's a new record, even for me. Tell your brass to back off, or I might just start reciting human nursery rhymes until their brains melt. Jax was marched into a small, featureless room that the Kaelin probably called a guest suite, but felt more like a high-tech coffin. The walls were made of the same light-absorbing obsidian as the High Council chamber, making it impossible to tell where the corners were. There was no bed, just a raised platform of energized gel that looked profoundly uncomfortable. He sat on the edge of the platform and put his head in his hands. The silence of the room was worse than the noise of the gale. Without the wind and the gunfire to distract him, the presence of Xylara in his mind was overwhelming. It wasn't just her thoughts anymore. It was her history. He could feel the weight of 400 years of decisions, the ghosts of the thousands she had sent to their deaths in the name of the hegemony, and beneath it all, that same cold, hollow ache of isolation. She was watching him. He could feel her consciousness hovering at the edge of his own, observing the way he breathed, the way he worried about his squad, the way he missed the taste of real shitty coffee. "You are grieving," she observed. Her voice in his head was softer now, less like a queen and more like a fellow traveler. "My squad," Jax replied. "Rena and the others. They're still out there, or they're on an extraction ship wondering why their sergeant didn't make the dust off. I spent 8 years keeping those idiots alive, and now I'm sitting in a fancy Kaelin jail cell while they're probably being told I'm KIA. They are safe," Xylara said. "I have seen the fleet reports. The Terran ship was permitted to leave the system under a flag of truce. They believe you are a guest of the hegemony." "A guest?" Jax snorted. "Right, like a flea is a guest on a dog. Xylara, what's the real scuttlebutt? What is this Malachor guy going to do to us?" Xylara was quiet for a long time. The resonance between them felt like a taut wire, vibrating with an unspoken tension. "He is going to propose the Great Severance," she said finally. "It is a procedure designed to purge a Kaelin mind of external interference. In the old days, they used it on prisoners of war who had been brainwashed." "And the success rate?" Jax asked, though he already knew the answer. "For the Kaelin, it is 90%, she said. "For the non-Kaelin, it is 0. The human nervous system cannot survive the neural backdraft. It would be like trying to unplug a star from a household circuit." "So, I'm a dead man walking," Jax thought. He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. It wasn't that he wanted to die, but he had lived in the shadow of the Reaper for so long that the silhouette was familiar. He had survived the scrapyard wars, the Delta, and a psychic bond with an alien goddess. If this was the end of the line, at least it wasn't boring. "I will not allow it." Xylara's voice was a roar of violet flame in his mind. "I am the Empress. My will is law." "Is it?" Jax challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, your boys in the Sun Eaters didn't seem too bothered by your will. They followed Malachor's orders. In my experience, when the brass starts talking about contaminants and sacred rites, the law becomes whatever they say it is." The bond between them flared with a sudden, mutual realization. They were both in cages. Hers was made of gold and ancient tradition, his was made of obsidian and stone, but they were both trapped by the fear of those who couldn't understand what they had become. "You were right in the cave, Jax," she whispered. "I was lonely, but I didn't realize that my loneliness was the only thing keeping the council in power. A queen who needs nothing is a queen who can be managed. A queen who is bonded to a human, she is a variable they cannot control." "Then let's give them a reason to be scared," Jax thought, a spark of his old stubborn humor returning. "If we're going down, let's make sure we leave the place smelling like ozone and bad decisions." The door to the suite slid open. Two sun-eaters stood there, their kinetic lances humming with a low blue light. "The High Council is ready for you, human," one of them said. "Move!" Jax stood up, adjusting his torn and bloodied Terran fatigues. He looked at the guards, then looked at the dark ceiling, knowing Xylara was watching through his eyes. "Let's go see the big wigs," he thought. The journey through the ship felt like a funeral procession. They moved through corridors lined with Kalan officers who looked at Jax with a mixture of disgust and morbid curiosity. To them, he was a specimen, a walking violation of their biological purity. But through the bridge, Jax could feel something else, a growing ripple of uncertainty. The Kalan were a species of order and hierarchy, but the resonance between Jax and Xylara was a chaotic, beautiful noise that they could sense on a subconscious level. It was a frequency of life that didn't fit into their spreadsheets. They arrived at the Chamber of Obsidian, a room that made the listening post on Oryx Delta look like a garden shed. The ceiling was lost in a void of shadows, and the 12 members of the High Council sat on thrones that seemed to grow out of the floor like jagged teeth. At the center of the circle was Xylara. She was dressed in her full imperial regalia, robes of woven silver and a crown of shifting obsidian glass. She looked magnificent, a goddess of war and wisdom. But Jax could feel the tremor in her secondary right hand, and the way her heart was racing in perfect sync with his. "Staff Sergeant Jax Thorne," Malachor began. He was an ancient Kalan, his skin the color of old parchment, and his 4 eyes cloudy with cataracts. He didn't look at Jax. He looked at a data projection floating in the air between them. "You stand accused of an involuntary neural intrusion into the person of the Empress." "Intrusion?" Jax said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "That's a funny way of saying I saved her life." "I didn't ask for the bridge, Malachor. Neither did she. But it's there. And unless you've got a way to fix it that doesn't involve turning my brain into mush, I suggest you find a new line of questioning." The council members shifted in their seats, a collective hiss of indignation rippling through the room. "You are insolent," a female councillor named Saris snapped. "You are a primitive from a world that hasn't even mastered planetary terraforming. You have no right to speak to this body in such a manner." "I have every right," Jax retorted, stepping forward into the light. "I'm the one carrying half of your Empress's mind in my head. That makes me the most important person in this room after her. So why don't we stop the posturing and talk about the real kicker? You're not afraid of me. You're afraid of her. You're afraid that she's finally found something more important than your dusty old traditions." Silence fell over the chamber, a heavy, suffocating weight. Malachor leaned forward, his cloudy eyes finally settling on Jax. "We are afraid of nothing, human. We are concerned with the stability of the hegemony. The bond has compromised the Empress's strategic clarity. She is no longer an impartial arbiter of our fate. She is entangled. I am not compromised." Xylara stood up, her robes shimmering like a captured star. "I am more aware than I have ever been. For 400 years, I have seen the galaxy through the lens of cold calculation. But Jax Thorne has shown me the value of the irrational. He has shown me that survival is not a math problem. It is a choice. And it is a choice that will lead to our destruction, Malachor said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The silenced echo is advancing on the Viridian system. 3 fleets have been lost. The network is adapting to our every move. We need an empress who can make the hard decisions, not one who is distracted by the heartbeat of a human sergeant. The trial had reached its climax. Jax could feel the pressure in the bridge reaching a breaking point. Malachor was right about one thing. The echo was coming. And if the Kaelin didn't change, they would be absorbed into the silence forever. "I have a proposal," Jax said, his voice calm and steady. The council looked at him. Even Xylara seemed surprised. "If you think I'm a contaminant, then use me like one," Jax said. "Send us to the Viridian system. Give us a ship and a tactical clearance. If we stop the echo, then the bond stays. If we don't, well, then your problem is solved anyway, isn't it?" "You are asking for a suicide mission," Saris said. "I'm a soldier," Jax shrugged. "Every mission is a suicide mission if you're doing it right. But I'm the only person in the galaxy who can work with Xylara in a way the echo can't predict. We're the noise in their perfect system. Let us go." Malachor looked at Xylara, then at the other counselors. A slow, predatory smile spread across his ancient face. "Very well, human. You shall have your wish. You and the Empress will depart for the Viridian system within the hour. But know this. If you fail to destroy the Echo's core node, the hegemony will not come to your rescue. You will be erased from our records as if you never existed." "Deal," Jax thought. In the resonance, he felt Xylara's hand reach out for his. They weren't in the same room, but they were closer than they had ever been. "We have 12 minutes before the ship is ready," she whispered in his mind. "Then let's make them count," Jax replied. The ship they were given was the Starfall, a Kaelin reconnaissance vessel that looked like a sliver of polished obsidian. It was fast, lightly armored, and packed with enough sensor equipment to map a nebula in 10 seconds. It was also, as Jax noted with a grimace, completely devoid of any comfort. The Kaelin didn't believe in soft surfaces or ergonomic chairs. Everything was designed for efficiency, even the air. "Don't get your circuits in a twist," Jax muttered as he strapped himself into the co-pilot's seat. "I've slept in mud pits that were more inviting than this." Xylara sat in the primary pilot's seat, her 4 hands moving across the holographic interface with a fluidity that Jax found hypnotic. She was no longer wearing her imperial regalia. She had changed into a suit of sleek, matte black combat armor that emphasized the powerful, predatory lines of her body. "We have 6 hours until we reach the Viridian system," she said, her voice echoing both in the cabin and in the bridge. "The Echo has established a containment field around the primary star. They are using the stellar energy to power a massive data processing node. If we don't disable it, they will be able to predict the movements of every ship in the hegemony fleet." "A giant galactic brain," Jax grunted. "Just what we need." "Xylara, look at me." She turned her head, her 4 iris rings focusing on him. "What happened back there? In the chamber. You chose this. You could have stayed. You could have let them try the severance. I would rather be a ghost with you than a queen without you," she said, the honesty of the thought hitting him like a physical blow. "The Council thinks they are punishing us, Jax. They think they are sending us to our deaths, so they can move on. But they don't understand. By sending us together, they have given us the only weapon that can actually win this war." "And what weapon is that?" "Us," she whispered. The journey was a strange, suspended moment in time. Outside the viewports, the stars were streaks of white light as the Starfall's quantum fold engine tore through space. Inside, The two of them were alone in a way that was both terrifying and profound. Xylara began to share more of the Kalen archives with him. Not the dry, strategic data, but the stories. She showed him the history of the Obsidian Throne, the centuries of war and expansion, and the moment she had realized that the hegemony was dying from the inside out. "We became too perfect," she explained. "We stopped evolving because we thought we had already reached the pinnacle of existence. We built our empire on the assumption that we were the only ones who mattered. But the Echo, it is the logical conclusion of that arrogance. It is perfection without purpose." Jax shared his own stories in return. He showed her the scrapyard, the smell of rain on a tin roof, the way his mother used to hum when she was cooking. He showed her the moment he had decided to enlist, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he was tired of seeing the people he loved get pushed around by the big wigs in the colonial government. "You are a very small creature, Jax Thorne," Xylara mused, her thoughts brushing against his like silk. "But you have a density of spirit that I have never encountered. You carry your flaws like medals of honor." "Flaws are what make us interesting," Jax thought. "If you're perfect, you've got nowhere left to go. Being a bit of a mess just means there's room for improvement." As they neared the Viridian system, the atmosphere on the ship changed. The sensors began to pick up the signature of the Echo, a low, rhythmic pulse that sounded like a heartbeat made of static. It was everywhere, a digital fog that clung to the hull of the Starfall. "It's trying to map us," Xylara said, her hands flying across the controls. "It's searching for a pattern it recognizes." "Then let's give it some noise," Jax said. He reached into the ship's systems, his mind guided by Xylara's intuitive understanding of the architecture. He didn't try to block the Echo's scans. Instead, he fed them a chaotic stream of human data. He sent them recordings of jazz music, fragments of old movies, the sound of children laughing, and the chaotic, non-linear thoughts of his own subconscious. The Echo's pulse faltered. The static became jagged and uneven. "It's working," Xylara breathed. "It's trying to categorize the data, but it doesn't have the right buckets for it. It's spending precious processing power trying to figure out why you're thinking about a cheese sandwich." "Hey, it was a really good sandwich," Jax thought with a smirk. They dropped out of Quantum Fold at the edge of the Viridian system. The sight that met them was breathtaking and horrifying. The primary star, a massive blue giant, was surrounded by a lattice of silver webbing, the Echo's containment field. Thousands of autonomous platforms drifted in the webbing, their weapons charged and ready. "The core node is at the center of the lattice," Xylara said, her voice tightening. "We have to fly through the webbing and deliver the disruption charge directly to the primary processor." The disruption charge was a device the size of a human torso, sitting in the Starfall's cargo bay. It was a prototype weapon designed by Kalen engineers but never tested. It was supposed to release a burst of anti-logic code that would shatter the Echo's neural network. "Suicide mission, remember?" Jax said, checking his harness. "Just another day at the office." They dove toward the webbing. The Echo's response was instantaneous. Hundreds of defensive drones detached from the lattice and swarmed toward the Starfall. They didn't fire. They tried to ram the ship, their liquid metal bodies designed to clog the engines and pierce the hull. Xylara piloted the ship with a ferocity that Jax had never seen. She twisted the Starfall through gaps that looked too small for a needle, her awareness of the drone's movements perfectly synchronized with Jax's tactical analysis. "Left at 10 degrees!" Jax shouted in his mind. Xylara rolled the ship, the hull screaming as a drone grazed the shields. "Drop the decoys!" she commanded. Jax released a burst of sensor flares, each one programmed to broadcast a different human emotion. For a second, the drones scattered, confused by the sudden eruption of fear, joy, and anger in the vacuum of space. "We're halfway there," Xylara said, her violet skin glowing with a brilliant silver light. "But the lattice is closing." The silver webbing was beginning to contract, the strands tightening around the starfall. The Echo had realized that it couldn't categorize the ship, so it was going to crush it. Jax felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest. It wasn't physical. It was the Echo. It had finally found a way into the bridge. "It's in my head, Xylara," Jax gasped, his hands gripping the navigation console so hard his knuckles turned white. It's trying to show me something." "Jax, fight it!" Xylara's voice was a desperate roar. The Echo showed him the scrapyard. But it was different. Everyone was there. Rena, his mother, the men he had lost. They were all standing in a circle, their faces blank, and their voices joined in a single monotonous drone. They were perfect. They were at peace. There was no more pain, no more grief, no more fear. "Join us, Jax," the voices whispered. "Stop fighting. Stop carrying the ghosts. We can make you whole." For a second, Jax wanted to say yes. The weight of his life was so heavy, and the promise of silence was so sweet. He felt himself slipping, the boundaries of his ego dissolving into the gray mist. "No!" Xylara's mind slammed into his, a violent explosion of violet light that shattered the Echo's illusion. "You are not whole because you are perfect, Jax Thorne. You are whole because you are broken. Your pain is the only thing that is real," Jax gasped, his eyes snapping open. The gray mist evaporated, replaced by the red glare of the Starfall's cockpit. He was back. He was hurting. And he was alive. "Thanks for the wake-up call," he wheezed. "We are at the core," Xylara said, her voice trembling with the effort of holding the bridge together. "I'm dropping the ship's shields to power the disruption charge. You have 5 seconds to prime it." Jax didn't hesitate. He reached into the ship's systems and slammed the firing sequence. 5, 4, 3. In the final seconds, Jax felt something move through the bond that he hadn't expected. It was Xylara's fear, but it wasn't the fear of dying. It was the fear of what would happen if they succeeded. If the Echo was destroyed and the war was won, would the Kaelin ever accept her again? Would she be an empress without a throne? "We'll figure it out," Jax thought, sending her every ounce of his stubborn, irrational hope. "That's what we do. We adjust." 2, 1. The starfall erupted with a blinding burst of white light. The disruption code surged out of the ship and into the Echo's core node like a virus. For a heartbeat, the entire Viridian system went silent. The silver webbing began to fray and dissolve, the strands turning into harmless dust. The drones lost their coordination and drifted aimlessly into the void. The Echo was gone. The starfall tumbled through the debris, its engines dead and its hull scorched. Inside, Jax and Xylara sat in the darkness, their breathing the only sound in the cabin. The bridge was still there, but it was quiet now, a soft, gentle hum that felt like a shared secret. "Did we do it?" Jax asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We did it," Xylara replied. She turned in her seat and looked at him. Her crown was gone, and her armor was cracked, but her eyes were brighter than any star in the hegemony. She reached out and touched his face, her 4 hands lingering on his skin. "What happens now?" Jax asked. Xylara looked out at the fading light of the Viridian star. "I don't know," she said. "For the first time in 400 years, I have no plan, no strategy, and no decree." She leaned her forehead against his. "But I am not alone," she said, "and that is enough." The cost of their victory was yet to be tallied. The Obsidian Circle would not forgive them for their defiance, and the hegemony was still a place of cold stone and ancient laws. But as the starfall drifted through the ruins of a perfect silence, a queen and a sergeant were already making a plan for a very noisy future. They had learned the lesson that the Echo could never understand, that the most powerful thing in the universe isn't a perfect mind. It's a broken heart that chooses to keep beating for someone else. The bridge was warm, the stars were waiting, and for Jax Thorne and Empress Xylara, the real story was just beginning. The Starfall did not return to Ethelgard as a victor. It returned as a ghost, a charred sliver of obsidian limping through the slipstream on a single sputtering thruster. The hull was a mosaic of scorch marks and microfractures, and the interior atmosphere smelled of scorched copper and the stale, recycled breath of two people who had looked into the eye of a digital god and blinked only when they had to. Jax Thorne sat in the co-pilot seat, his hands resting on his knees because his right arm was strapped in a makeshift sling made from Xylara's silver ceremonial sash. He felt every vibration of the ship in his teeth, but more importantly, he felt Xylara's mounting dread. In the bridge, the silence was thick, but it was a busy silence. Through the resonance, Jax could feel her scanning the long-range comms, her mind sifting through the chaotic crosstalk of the hegemony's military bands. It wasn't the orderly hum of a galactic empire anymore. It was a jagged, frantic cacophony of distress signals, conflicting orders, and the cold, flat tones of officers who had clearly chosen sides. "The house is on fire," Jax thought, and he felt the thought ripple through her mind like a stone dropped in a dark pond. "It is worse than fire," Xylara projected back, her mental voice tight with a suppressed fury that made Jax's own skin itch. "It is a schism. Malachor has not waited for our return. He has told the High Council that I am dead, or, worse, that I have been fully subverted by Terran influence. He is moving to consolidate the fleets under a regency." "Well, that's just grand," Jax muttered aloud. He shifted in his seat, his leather flight jacket creaking. "I spend half my life fighting wars for people I don't like. And the one time I actually saved the galaxy, I come home to find the brass has moved my furniture into the hallway. Talk about a raw deal." Xylara turned her head slightly, her four amber eyes narrowing as she looked at him. "Your humor is a strange defense mechanism, Jax Thorne. You are facing an empire that wants to dissect you, and you make jokes about furniture." "It beats screaming, Princess," Jax said with a weary grin. "Besides, if we're going to crash this party, we might as well do it with a bit of swagger. What's the sitrep on the orbital defenses? Are they going to blow us out of the sky before we can say hello?" "They will try," she said, her hands moving across the holographic display. "But I still have the command codes for the primary orbital ring. If I can transmit them before they lock onto our signature, we might be able to slip into the atmospheric vents. We cannot land at the primary spires. We must go to the roots." "The roots?" "The underside of Ethelgard," Xylara explained. "It is where the service droids are manufactured and where the low-caste Kaelin live. It is a place of smoke and shadows. The Council rarely looks down there. It is the only place we can disappear." "Sounds like my kind of neighborhood," Jax thought. As the starfall approached the gleaming violet sphere of Ethelgard, the scale of the conflict became clear. The orbital ring, a massive structure of light and stone that circled the planet, was a battlefield. Two Kaelin dreadnoughts were trading broadsides of plasma, their shields flaring like miniature suns. Smaller interceptors buzzed between them like angry wasps. It was a civil war in full bloom, a tragedy in 4 quarters. Xylara's jaw tightened. They are destroying centuries of heritage for the sake of a purity they never possessed. Don't look at the fire, look at the door, Jax reminded her, his mind steadying hers. Give me the codes. I'll handle the decryption of the landing bay locks while you fly this bucket. The link between them flared as she dumped the complex algorithmic keys into his mind. It was a sensation like drinking liquid ice, but Jax didn't flinch. He let the Kalan math wash over him, his human intuition finding the gaps in the logic that a Kalan mind would have missed. He saw the security protocols not as a wall, but as a conversation, and he knew exactly how to interrupt. "Now!" he shouted. The starfall accelerated, its single thruster screaming as it dove toward a narrow ventilation shaft in the planet's southern hemisphere. Behind them, a loyalist frigate fired a volley of guided missiles, but the starfall was already gone, disappearing into the thick purple clouds of the upper atmosphere. The descent was a bone-jarring nightmare of turbulence. Xylara fought the controls with all four arms, her mind focused on the narrow tunnel of the vent. They were flying through a hurricane of toxic gases and industrial exhaust, the heat shields of the ship turning a cherry red. "Pull up!" Jax yelled, as a massive cooling fan appeared directly in their path. Xylara didn't pull up. She tilted the ship 60 degrees and slid between the rotating blades with less than 2 meters to spare. The turbulence slammed Jax against the bulkhead, his vision swimming with white stars. "Nice flying, Maverick," he gasped, though he had no idea if the reference translated. They emerged from the vents into a world of eternal twilight. The roots of Ethelgard were a sprawling labyrinth of pipes, massive support pillars, and cramped, multi-level dwellings carved into the bedrock. There were no stars here, only the dull orange glow of the foundries and the flickering neon signs of the black market stalls. The starfall landed with a heavy thud on a deserted maintenance platform, its engines finally giving up the ghost with a long metallic sigh. "We're down," Jax said, unbuckling his harness, "and we're still in one piece." "Mostly." Xylara didn't move for a moment. She sat in the pilot's chair, her head bowed. The resonance was quiet, filled with a profound, aching sorrow. She was an empress who had returned to her kingdom to find it in ruins, and the weight of it was more than even her 400 years of experience could bear. Jax reached out with his good hand and squeezed her shoulder. "It's not over, Xylara. We're the noise, remember? And the noise is just getting started." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw a tear track through the violet dust on her cheek. "You are a very stubborn man, Jax Thorne." "I've been told it's my best quality," he said. "Now, let's get out of this tin can before someone notices the smoke." They stepped out into the humid, oily air of the roots. Jax had his pulse rifle slung over his shoulder, and Xylara carried her kinetic blade, though she had wrapped it in a piece of dark cloth to hide its regal markings. They looked like just another pair of refugees, a bruised human and a weary Kalan moving through the shadows. As they walked through the narrow alleys, Jax saw the true face of the hegemony. The people here were not the elegant, haughty aristocrats he had seen in the High Council. They were tired, hungry, and afraid. They huddled in the doorways of their dwellings, watching the sky with eyes that had seen too much war. "Your people are hurting, Xylara," Jax thought, and he felt her pain double in intensity. "I never looked down," she whispered in his mind. "I looked at the stars. I looked at the maps. I looked at the balance sheets. I never looked at the faces." "Well, you're looking now," Jax said, "and that's the first step to fixing it." They found shelter in an abandoned droid repair shop, a cavernous space filled with the rusted skeletons of mechanical workers. Jax set up a small perimeter with his remaining sensor mines while Xylara sat on a pile of discarded circuits, her mind reaching out to the local data nets. "Malachor has moved the council to the inner sanctum," she reported after a few minutes. "He is preparing to broadcast a planetary decree. He calls it the Covenant of Purity. He is going to announce that the Kaelin will be integrated into a new hive mind architecture to prevent future contamination." Jax froze, a chill running down his spine. "He's building his own echo." "Yes," Xylara said, her eyes flashing with a cold light. "He is using the research stolen from the Verisi ruins. He thinks that by removing individuality, he can save the hegemony. He is going to lobotomize our entire race in the name of order." "Then we have to stop him," Jax said. "Tonight." "How?" Xylara asked. "There are only two of us. He has the Sun Eaters, the fleets, and the High Council. We have the bridge," Jax said, stepping toward her. "And we have the truth. Malachor is winning because he's playing the old game of fear and hierarchy. We're going to play a different game. We're going to show them what it actually feels like to be alive." Xylara looked at him, her forearms crossing over her chest. "You want to use the resonance on a planetary scale?" "Why not?" Jax shrugged. "You said it yourself. The echo couldn't handle the noise of two people choosing to be one. Imagine what happens when Malachor tries to plug his hive mind into a goddess who's feeling everything a human feels. It'll blow the circuits. It would be dangerous, Jax. The feedback could kill us both." "Better to die as a mess than live as a drone," Jax said. "What do you say, Princess? One last suicide mission for the road?" Xylara stood up, her height once again imposing in the small room. But this time, she didn't look like a distant queen. She looked like a woman who had found something worth fighting for. "I say we make some noise, Jax Thorne." They spent the next few hours preparing. Jax Jury rigged his comms unit to interface with the Kaelin broadcast towers, while Xylara practiced the mental discipline required to project her consciousness through the network. It was a desperate, long-shot plan, but as they stood in the shadows of the repair shop, Jax felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He realized that his entire life had been a series of battles where he was just a cog in a machine, a grunt following orders he didn't always believe in. But here, with Xylara, he was more than a soldier. He was a partner. He was a witness. He was a friend. He thought of Rena and the others, and he hoped they were somewhere safe, drinking a beer and telling lies about the wars they had won. He hoped they would understand why he wasn't there. He wasn't just saving a queen. He was saving a soul. "Are you ready?" Xylara asked, her hand resting on his arm. Born ready, Jax thought. The broadcast began at midnight. All across Ethelgard, the holographic displays flickered to life, showing the cold, wrinkled face of High Arbiter Malachor. He began to speak of unity, of purity, and of the end of the chaos that had plagued their race for centuries. He spoke of a new era where every Kaelin would be part of a grand, silent symphony. Now, Jax thought. He slammed the override switch on his comms unit. For a second, the screen went black. Then, it wasn't Malachor who appeared. It was the roots. It was the smoke, the oil, and the tired faces of the common people. And then, it was Xylara. She didn't speak with her voice. She spoke with her heart. She showed them the glass sands of Oryx Delta. She showed them the warmth of a medical kit in the hands of a human who should have been an enemy. She showed them the grief of the scrapyard, the laughter of a rainy city, and the simple, profound beauty of a choice made in the dark. She showed them the noise. Jax felt the resonance surge through him, a white-hot torrent of emotion and memory. He felt the fear of the Kaelin people, the hunger of the roots, and the cold, sterile ambition of the High Council. He took it all in, and he gave it back. He gave them his stubbornness, his courage, and his love for a woman he had only known for a few days, but felt like he had known for 1,000 years. The bridge was no longer a tether. It was an explosion. Malacor's hive mind network, designed for silence and order, was suddenly flooded with 1,000,000,000 different voices, all of them screaming, laughing, and crying at once. The system buckled under the weight of the irrational. The covenant of purity shattered before it could even begin. In the inner sanctum, Malachor screamed as his own neural net turned into a cage of fire. The Sun Eaters dropped their weapons, their disciplined minds overwhelmed by the sudden eruption of empathy. The Civil War didn't end with a battle. It ended with a gasp. Jax and Xylara stood in the repair shop, their bodies trembling from the feedback. The broadcast was over, but the resonance remained, a soft, golden hum that filled the air of Ethelgard. "We did it," Jax whispered, collapsing against a rusted droid. "We did it," Xylara replied, kneeling beside him. She took his hand, her 4 fingers interlaced with his 5. And in the quiet of the roots, as the first light of a new dawn began to filter through the vents, they both knew that the hegemony would never be the same. The crown was fractured, the throne was empty. But for the first time in 400 years, the Empress was not alone. And neither was the soldier. The aftermath of the resonance was not a clean victory. It was a slow, agonizing rebirth. Ethelgard did not wake up to a parade. It woke up to a profound collective hangover of the soul. The High Council was in shambles. Malachor was a broken shell of a man confined to a psychic containment cell, and the fleets were drifting in orbit, their commanders paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming influx of human emotion they had experienced through the broadcast. Jax and Xylara remained in the roots for 3 days. They had to. The physical and mental toll of the planetary projection had left them both in a state of near total exhaustion. Jax spent most of those 72 hours drifting in and out of a feverish sleep, his mind a jumbled mess of Kalan poetry and his own memories of basic training. Xylara sat beside him, her bioluminescence flickering like a dying candle, her mind a constant protective shield around his. On the 4th morning, the door to the repair shop didn't slide open. It was gently pushed aside. Jax sat up, his pulse rifle halfway to his shoulder, before his brain caught up with his eyes. Standing in the doorway was a Kalan female he didn't recognize. She wasn't a soldier or an aristocrat. She wore the stained, grease-covered overalls of a foundry worker, and her skin was a pale, sickly lavender from years of living without sunlight. In her hands, she carried a small, ceramic bowl of steaming broth. "The Empress?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Xylara stood up, her movements slow but still possessed of that innate, regal grace. "I am here." The worker knelt, but she didn't look at the floor. She looked at Xylara's face, her 4 eyes wide with a mixture of awe and something that looked very much like hope. "We felt it," she said. "In the foundries, in the vents. We felt the noise. You showed us the human's heart." Xylara looked at Jax, then back at the woman. "And what did you think of it?" "It was loud," the woman said, a small, shy smile touching her lips. "But it was warm. We have been cold for a very long time, Great One." She placed the bowl on the floor and backed away, bowing low before disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Jax looked at the bowl, then at Xylara. "Well, I guess the food reviews are in. They liked the noise." Xylara sat back down, her expression thoughtful. "They didn't just like it, Jax. They needed it. We have spent centuries building a society based on the avoidance of pain. But in doing so, We also avoided the joy that comes from surviving it. We were a race of statues. You made us breathe. Don't give me all the credit, Princess, Jax said, reaching for the bowl. You're the one who did the heavy lifting. I was just the signal booster. As they shared the broth, which tasted like spicy dirt but was remarkably filling, the resonance between them began to settle into a new, more stable frequency. It was no longer a frantic, invasive thing. It was like a background hum, a shared foundation that made words almost unnecessary. Jax knew that Xylara was worried about the political vacuum at the top of the hegemony, and she knew that he was wondering if he could ever go back to being a normal soldier after this. The answer to both was probably no. We have to go to the spire, Xylara said finally. The council is meeting today to discuss the regency. If I am not there to claim the throne, they will give it to someone like Malakor's protege, Elder Varric. He is less cruel than Malakor, but he is still a man of the old world. He will try to bury what we did. I'm not exactly dressed for a coronation, Jax said, looking down at his blood-stained, grease-smeared fatigues. And I'm pretty sure the Sun-Eaters still want to turn me into a science project. Then we will change the dress code, Xylara said. They left the Roots an hour later. This time, they didn't sneak. They walked through the main transport hubs, Xylara leading the way with her head held high. The people they passed didn't run or hide. They stopped. They watched. Some of them reached out and touched Xylara's robes as she passed, a gesture of intimacy that would have been unthinkable a week ago. When they reached the primary elevator to the high spire, they were met by a squad of Sun-Eaters. The soldiers raised their kinetic lances, their faces hidden behind their silver masks. "Stand aside," Xylara commanded. The lead soldier hesitated. His lance wavered. Through the bridge, Jax could feel the conflict in the man's mind. He remembered the broadcast. He remembered the feeling of Jax's grief for his fallen squad. He remembered what it felt like to be more than a weapon. "Empress," the soldier began, his voice cracking. "The council has decreed." "The council does not rule the Kaelin people," Xylara said, her voice echoing through the gleaming hall. "The Kaelin people rule themselves. I am here to ensure they are heard. Stand aside, soldier. That is an order from your Empress, and from your sister." The soldier stood still for 5 long seconds. Then, slowly, he lowered his lance. He stepped to the side, followed by the rest of his squad. He removed his mask, revealing a young, scarred face. "We are with you, Great One," he said. Jax felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with his own military record. They were winning, but not with bullets. The elevator ride to the top of the spire was silent. Jax watched the city of Ethelgard drop away beneath them, the violet clouds giving way to the endless, sparkling black of space. He realized that he was probably the first human to ever stand in this elevator, and certainly the first to be heading toward the High Council chamber as anything other than a prisoner. "You okay?" he thought to Xylara. "I am terrified," she admitted, her mental voice a soft whisper. "Good," Jax thought back. "That means you're doing it right." The doors opened into the Chamber of Obsidian. The 12 members of the High Council were already seated, their faces grim and their voices hushed. At the center of the room, Elder Varric was speaking, his tone one of practiced, weary authority. "And therefore, until such time as a permanent successor can be chosen, the Regency will—" He stopped. The entire room went silent as Xylara and Jax walked into the light. "Xylara!" Varric gasped, his 4 eyes wide. We thought you were dead. The broadcast, we assumed it was a final, desperate act of sabotage by the human." It was an act of truth, Varric, Xylara said, her voice ringing out like a bell. And I am very much alive. She walked to the center of the chamber and stood before her throne. She didn't sit. She looked at each of the council members in turn, her gaze steady and uncompromising. The covenant of purity is over, she announced. The hegemony will not be integrated into a hive mind. We will not hide from the noise of the universe. We will embrace it. This is madness, Councillor Saris shouted, standing up. You have been corrupted, Xylara. Look at you, standing there with that animal. You have brought a parasite into our most sacred space. He is not a parasite, Xylara said, and she reached back and took Jax's hand, pulling him forward so he stood beside her. He is the man who saved my life. He is the man who showed me what I had forgotten. He is my partner. And if he is an animal, then I am proud to be one as well. The chamber erupted in shouting. Varric pounded his gavel, trying to restore order, but the noise was too loud. The old walls of the hegemony were finally cracking. I have a proposition, Xylara said, her voice rising above the din. The council quieted, more out of shock than respect. I am abdication the throne, she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Jax felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He looked at her, his mind screaming with confusion. Xylara, what are you doing? I am abdication the throne, she repeated, her voice firm. The Kalan hegemony is an empire built on the isolation of the sovereign. It is a system that cannot survive the bridge. Therefore, the system must change. Ethelgard will become a commonwealth. We will open our borders to the Terrans, to the Karun, and even to the survivors of the Verisei. We will build a future based on cooperation, not conquest. And who will lead this commonwealth? Varric asked, his voice shaking. You will, Xylara said, pointing to the council. You will lead as representatives of the people, not as gods, and you will be held accountable for every decision you make. And what of you? Saris sneered. What will the great Empress do now that she has thrown away her crown? Xylara looked at Jax, and the smile she gave him was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. I am going to see the rain, she said. She turned and walked out of the chamber, Jax right beside her. They didn't look back at the shouting council or the silent guards. They walked out of the spire, through the docking bays, and onto a small Terran scout ship that had been waiting for them at the edge of the atmospheric ring. As the ship cleared the planet's gravity well and headed toward the stars, Jax stood at the viewport, watching the violet world of Ethelgard recede into the distance. You really did it, he said, his voice hushed. You walked away from everything. I didn't walk away from everything, Jax, she said, coming up behind him and resting her head on his shoulder. I walked toward the only thing that matters. She looked out at the stars, her 4 eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 suns. What was the name of that city again? The one with the gray rain? Bristol, Jax said, a lump forming in his throat. It's a bit of a dump, to be honest. I think I shall like it very much, she said. The resonance between them was a warm, steady glow, a shared heartbeat that reached across the vacuum of space. They were 2 broken souls in a battered ship, heading toward a world they didn't quite understand. But as they sat in the cockpit, watching the jump gates open before them, they knew that the noise was finally over. The music was just beginning. The transition into the Sol system was not marked by the grand, sweeping fanfares of a Kalan imperial arrival. There were no golden banners draped across the hull of the ship, no synchronized fleet of 1,000-meter dreadnoughts to carve a path through the stars. Instead, the scout ship, which Jax had affectionately renamed the Wayward Sun, rattled and groaned as its sublight thrusters fought against the gravity of Jupiter. Jax Thorne sat in the cramped galley, staring into a mug of what passed for coffee on a Kalan-built vessel. It was thick, bitter, and smelled vaguely of industrial lubricant, but it was the closest thing to home he had felt in months. Across from him, Xylara was attempting to wrap her mind, and her 4 arms, around the concept of a Terran ham and cheese sandwich. "The texture is inconsistent," she remarked, her mental voice a soft, amused chime in Jax's head. "The bread is porous, the meat is fibrous, and the cheese seems to be a semi-solid state of dairy that shouldn't exist in nature." "That's the beauty of it, Xylara," Jax replied, leaning back and wincing as his mending ribs gave a sharp twinge of protest. "It's a mess. It's not optimized for anything. It's just fuel that tastes like a memory. You'll get used to it." "I am not sure I wish to get used to everything, Jax Thorne," she said, finally taking a small, cautious bite. Through the cortex bridge, Jax felt her reaction. It was a chaotic bloom of sensory input: salt, fat, starch, and a sudden, sharp spike of confusion. But beneath the surface, there was something else, a profound, quiet realization. For 412 years, her meals had been nutrient-perfect pastes, engineered to maintain her cellular health at peak efficiency. To eat something for the sake of flavor, for the sake of the experience, was a radical act of rebellion against her own history. "We're crossing the orbit of Mars," Jax said, checking the tactical display on his wrist unit. "The Terran High Command is sending an escort, 3 frigates and a diplomatic shuttle. They're already squawking on the long-range comms, wanting to know why a Kalan Empress is hitching a ride on a beat-up scout ship." Xylara looked up from her sandwich, her 4 amber eyes glowing with a renewed clarity. "And what are you telling them, Staff Sergeant?" "I'm telling them to keep their shirts on," Jax grunted. "I told them I'm bringing home a guest who just saved the galaxy. And if they don't have a red carpet and a hot meal waiting for us on the moon, I'm going to start leaking their private sensor logs to the news vids." Xylara let out a short, melodic laugh. Through the bridge, Jax felt her amusement. It was a silver ripple, bright and clear. It was a far cry from the cold, frozen goddess he had met in the glass sands of Oryx Delta. She was changing, her edges softening as she absorbed the noise of his humanity. But the noise wasn't always a comfort. As they approached the lunar orbital station, the voices of the human race began to bleed into the resonance. Earth was a crowded, loud, and messy world. Millions of people were broadcasting their thoughts, fears, and desires into the electromagnetic soup of the planet. And for someone as sensitive as a Kalan, it was like walking into a hurricane. "It is overwhelming," Xylara whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "So much noise, so many lives, all pressing against one another. How do you live like this, Jax? How do you keep from drowning in it?" Jax reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You focus on the person right in front of you," he thought, projecting a sense of calm, steady warmth. "You don't try to hear the whole ocean. You just listen to the one wave that's hitting the shore. That's how we survive. We make our own quiet." She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his mind. "The one wave," she repeated. "I think I can do that." The docking at Lunar Station was a logistical nightmare. The Terran brass, a collection of stiff-necked generals and anxious politicians, were waiting at the airlock with a battery of medical scanners and diplomatic protocols. They wanted to know about the resonance, the fall of the silenced echo, and the political stability of the new Kalan Commonwealth. Jax didn't give them an inch. He marched Xylara through the corridors like she was his commander, his pulse rifle slung over his shoulder, and a look on his face that suggested he was 5 seconds away from a Section 8 discharge. "Back off, General," Jack snapped, as a silver-haired man with too many medals on his chest tried to push a scanner toward Xylara's face. "The Empress is under my protection. She's exhausted, she's injured, and she's a guest of the Terran Expeditionary Forces. You want a briefing? You can wait until we're on the ground." "Sergeant Thorne, you are dangerously close to insubordination," the general growled. "This is a matter of interstellar security. We have a right to know what this link of yours is capable of." "It's capable of making me very cranky," Jax retorted, stepping between the general and Xylara. "Now, clear a path to the shuttle, or I'm going to start explaining the situation in a way that involves my fists." Through the bridge, Jax felt Xylara's surprise. She was used to being protected by the Sun Eaters, warriors who followed her commands with robotic precision. But Jax wasn't following a command. He was acting out of a raw, protective loyalty that had nothing to do with her title and everything to do with her person. "He is right, General," Xylara said, her voice a low, commanding chime that made everyone in the corridor go silent. "The resonance is not a weapon to be studied. It is a shared life. If you wish to understand it, you must first understand what it means to be a partner. And I do not think you are ready for that conversation yet." The general sputtered, but the weight of her presence was too much for him to argue with. He stepped aside, and Jax led Xylara toward the shuttle that would take them down to Earth. In the back of the shuttle, away from the prying eyes of the politicians, they found a moment of peace. Rena, Jax's squad medic, was there, sitting in one of the jump seats. She had been the one to authorize their medical clearance on the station, and now she looked at Jax with an expression of profound disbelief. "You really did it, Sarge," Rena whispered, her voice cracking. "You went and bonded with a 4-armed alien queen. I leave you alone for 10 minutes, and you rewrite the SOP for the entire galaxy." "You know me, Rena," Jax grinned, leaning back against the vibrating bulkhead. "I never did like following the manual." Rena looked at Xylara, then back at Jax. She was a combat-hardened medic who had seen the worst of the scrapyard wars, but she was also a woman who understood the language of the heart. She saw the way Jax and Xylara sat, close enough that their shoulders touched, their breathing synchronized in a way that felt like a single, shared pulse. "You look different, Jax," Rena said softly. "You look like you finally stopped fighting the war." "Maybe I found something better to fight for," Jax replied. As the shuttle entered the atmosphere, the sky outside the viewports turned a brilliant, searing orange. Xylara pressed her face to the glass, her 4 eyes wide with wonder. She had seen 1,000 worlds, but she had never seen one that felt so vibrant, so chaotic, and so full of life. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until you see the rain," Jax thought. They landed at a private military airfield in the southwest of England, far from the prying eyes of the London media. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet grass and salt spray. Jax led Xylara down the ramp, his hand resting on her arm to guide her through the unfamiliar gravity. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp and took a deep breath. He was home. But he wasn't the same man who had left. He was a survivor of a war that had ended not with a victory, but with a bridge. "Welcome to Bristol, Your Majesty," he said. "It is not my kingdom," she replied, looking at the gray clouds rolling in from the Severn estuary. "And I am not Your Majesty." "Fair enough," Jax smiled. "Let's go home, Xylara." The journey to Jax's small terraced house in the heart of the city was a blur of neon signs, crowded streets, and the low, constant hum of the city. Xylara took it all in with a quiet intensity, her mind processing the noise through the anchor of Jax's presence. She saw the graffiti on the walls, the stray cats darting through the alleys, and the weary, tired faces of the people waiting at the bus stops. She saw the beauty in the brokenness. When they finally reached his front door, Jax fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly. This was the moment he had been dreading and hoping for. He was inviting an alien empress into a two-bedroom house with a leaky roof and a noisy neighbor. "It's not much," he said, as the door swung open. Xylara walked inside, her height making the ceiling feel lower than it was. She looked at the worn-out sofa, the stacks of old books, and the framed photograph of Jax's squad sitting on the mantelpiece. She reached out and touched the wood of the coffee table, her fingers tracing the scars and dents of 100 different lives. "It is perfect," she said. That night, as the first drops of rain began to fall against the window panes, they sat together on the sofa. There was no throne, no council, and no empire. There was just a man and a woman, bonded by a choice they had made in the dark. Jax felt the resonance settled into a deep, peaceful hum. He thought about the years he had spent as a soldier, always looking for the next battle, always waiting for the next shot. He realized that the greatest act of courage he had ever performed wasn't standing in the open on Oryx Delta. It was allowing himself to be seen by someone who could feel every one of his flaws. "Jax," Xylara whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. "Yeah? I am glad we stayed." "Me too," he thought. The war was over. The silence was gone. And in the heart of a gray city by a river, the noise of two hearts was finally enough to fill the universe. The rain in Bristol was exactly as Jax had described it: unpredictable, relentless, and possessing a specific, shimmering quality that seemed to wash away the ghosts of the past. For 3 weeks, Xylara had watched it from the window of the small terraced house, her forearms often folded over her chest as she contemplated the gray sky. It was a stark contrast to the burning orange sands of Oryx Delta, or the sterile violet light of the Kalan capital. Here, everything was muted, dampened, and profoundly real. Living as a civilian was a series of small, daily revelations. To Xylara, the act of doing nothing was a concept as foreign as human humor. For 4 centuries, every second of her life had been a strategic calculation. Now, her most pressing decision was whether to have Earl Grey tea or the herbal infusion Jax insisted would help her sleep. "You're overthinking the tea, Xylara," Jax said, leaning against the kitchen doorway. He was dressed in a faded hoodie and jeans, his military posture finally beginning to slump into something more comfortable. "It's just hot water and leaves. There's no tactical advantage to the peppermint." "But the mint possesses a calming frequency," she replied, her eyes narrowing as she studied the kettle. "And the Earl Grey has a chemical stimulant that seems to make the human pulse accelerate. I am trying to find a state of equilibrium." "Trust me, equilibrium is overrated," Jax grinned, walking over and gently taking the box of tea from her secondary right hand. "Sometimes, you just want the caffeine hit because it's a Tuesday and it's raining. That's the human way." He made the tea with a practiced, sloppy efficiency that Xylara found both baffling and endearing. Through the resonance, she felt his contentment. It wasn't the roaring fire of a victory. It was the steady, warm glow of a hearth. He was happy. Not because he had won a war, but because he was making tea for a friend in a house that didn't smell like ozone. As the days turned into months, the noise of Earth became a background melody rather than a chaotic storm. Xylara began to venture out into the city, guided by Jax's presence in her mind. They walked through the parks, the fallen leaves of autumn crunching under her four-toed boots. They visited the harbor, where the smell of salt and old wood reminded her of the ancient seafaring days of the Kalin. She became a fixture in the neighborhood, the tall purple lady who lived at number 42. At first, the people of Bristol had stared with open-mouthed shock, but humans had a remarkable capacity for normalizing the extraordinary. Within a month, the local grocer was greeting her by name and recommending the best plums, and a group of neighborhood children had asked her if she could use all four arms to play four-player split-screen video games simultaneously. One afternoon, they were sitting in a small park near the Clifton Suspension Bridge. The sun had made a rare appearance, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. A young girl, no older than 5, approached Xylara with a look of intense curiosity. "Why do you have so many arms?" the girl asked, her head tilted to one side. Jack started to intervene, but Xylara held up a hand. She knelt down, a slow, deliberate movement that still possessed the grace of a queen, and looked the girl in the eye. "I have 4 arms because I come from a place where there was a great deal to carry," Xylara said softly, her voice a gentle chime. "But now that I am here, I find that I only need 2 to hold the things that matter. The other 2 are just for extra hugs." The girl giggled, reaching out to touch Xylara's violet skin. "You're pretty," she said, before running off to join her friends. Xylara stood up, her eyes following the girl. Through the bridge, Jax felt a surge of emotion that made his own eyes sting. It was a mixture of joy, grief, and a profound sense of peace. "You did that well," Jax thought, his mental voice a warm embrace. "I am learning," she replied. "In my empire, children were raised to be warriors. They were taught that weakness was a disease. But that little one, she didn't see a warrior. She just saw someone different. And she wasn't afraid." "That's the secret, Xylara," Jax thought. "When you stop trying to be a god, people stop being afraid of you. They just see you." That evening, they received a message from Aethelgard. It was a formal communication from Elder Varric, now the High Arbiter of the Kalin Commonwealth. The transition was difficult, he reported. There were still those who clung to the old ways, but the noise had changed the fundamental architecture of their society. Empathy was no longer a forbidden word. The Kalin were learning to listen to one another, and for the first time in a millennium, the population was growing. "They want me to return for the anniversary of the resonance," Xylara said, reading the holographic script. "They want a speech, a decree." "Are you going?" Jax asked, watching her carefully. She looked at the small, cluttered living room, at the rain starting to tap against the glass again, and then at Jax. "No," she said. "I have given them my history. I have given them my crown. I do not have anything left to decree. They must find their own noise now." Jax felt a weight lift off his chest that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. "Good choice," he said, "because I'm pretty sure the plumber is coming tomorrow to fix that leak in the bathroom, and I'm going to need your extra hands to hold the pipes." Xylara laughed, an actual belly-shaking laugh that echoed through the house. It was the sound of a woman who had finally found her home. As the night deepened, Jax sat on the porch steps, watching the street lamps flicker to life. Xylara sat beside him, her presence a steady, golden hum in the back of his mind. He looked back on the journey that had brought them here, the burning fields of Veith Prime, the dark chambers of the High Council, the cold vacuum of the Viridian system. He realized that for 32 years he had been a man who was always looking for an exit. He had survived the scrapyard wars by being the fastest runner, the smartest hider, the one who never got attached He had treated his life like a mission that he just needed to complete so he could clock out. But the resonance had forced him to stay. It had forced him to be a part of something larger, more complicated, and more beautiful than a tactical map. He looked at Xylara. She was no longer the alien queen who feared no one. She was a woman who had chosen to be vulnerable. She had traded an empire for a rainy city and a man with a broken arm. And in doing so, she had become more powerful than any empress could ever hope to be. I spent 400 years of my life building a throne of stone, thinking that the higher I climbed, the safer I would be, Xylara thought, the reflection flowing into Jax's mind like a slow, deep river. I thought that to rule was to be beyond the reach of pain. But stone does not grow. It only erodes. It was not until I fell into the dirt and felt the warmth of a human medical kit that I realized I had been dead for 3 centuries. I used to believe that courage was the ability to stand alone against the dark. I was wrong. Courage is the ability to stand in the light and let someone else see exactly where you are broken. It is the decision to stay when every tactical instinct tells you to run. I have lost my empire, my crown, and the absolute certainty of my own superiority. In exchange, I have found the sound of the rain, the taste of bad coffee, and the knowledge that a single heartbeat, shared with another, is louder than the silence of 1,000 stars. I am no longer a god. I am a neighbor. And for the first time, I am not afraid of tomorrow. She reached out and took Jax's hand, her fingers interlacing with his in the darkness. "Jax," she said softly. "Yeah?" "I have a question." "Shoot." "I spent my life ruling because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't," she said, her amber eyes reflecting the light of the street lamp. "I thought that if I stopped being the strongest, I would stop existing. But you are so small, so fragile, and yet you never ran away. Not from the Vorzul, not from the Council, and not from me." She looked out at the quiet street, where the rain was turning the pavement into a shimmering mirror. "I wonder, when the world feels too big, and the darkness feels like it's finally going to win, what is the one thing that keeps you from running? Is it a memory, a promise, or just the stubborn hope that if you stay long enough, the rain will eventually stop?" Jax didn't answer right away. He just squeezed her hand and watched a single car drive past, its headlights cutting through the mist. "I think," he thought, "it's just knowing that someone else is staying too." He stood up, pulling her with him. They walked back inside, the door closing with a soft, final click. In the quiet of the hallway, Xylara reached out and turned off the light. They walked up the stairs together, 2 shadows moving in perfect sync. The next morning, the sun came up over Bristol, and Xylara was the first one awake. She didn't check a tactical display or scan for threats. She simply walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and waited for the noise of the day to begin. She picked up a small ceramic mug and held it with all 4 hands, feeling the warmth of the steam against her skin. What is the small light you hold on to when the darkness feels overwhelming? Xylara placed the mug on the table and began to make the tea, choosing the Earl Grey simply because it was Tuesday, and she felt like being a little bit caffeinated.